Hello and welcome to the next episode of the J Plus R Movie Podcast. We will be discussing Dark City. Giving a plot synopsis of this film will be kind of difficult given the nature of the film. So all I'll say is that it basically opens at night with this man named John Murdoch who wakes up in this apartment and he's seemingly killed a prostitute and he doesn't have any memories of what has happened before, and he's being chased by the police and he has to work out what's going on whilst also being pursued by other people as well, who basically have the key to explaining what's going on. And as it goes along, we start to find out the reasons why the situation happened, and also to find out who these other people chasing them are, named the Strangers. And later on, we find out what their goals are, what their plans are, and how they hold the secrets to not only Murdoch, but also basically everybody else in the city. I really liked it. It's part of that vein of, kind of sci-fi films that came out in the 90s that sort of dealt with concepts like this, like The Truman Show or The Matrix, ones that dealt with the notion that the world around you is constructed and not real.
To get odd Total Recall vibes, but in reverse.
Yeah, I got that sense too. It's kind of like Total Recall, but less campy, more serious. But anyway, so it came out during that time, but I think it does in some ways stand out for two reasons. One of them being the style, and the other one being just the overall take that they do on this kind of story.
I think the style is probably one of the most pronounced differences, because I have seen things in this kind of narrative vein before. As much as it is quite a unique film, it is sort of in the vein of kind of any oppressed society thing. It's obviously not quite The Matrix. It's not really a full chosen one thing, because obviously although he is psychokinetic, it's not like he's the Messiah or seen that way. He's just a falsely accused killer with a past that we don't understand.
Well, then it turns out that he's not a killer at all, because
exactly.
The take that they do on this kind of story is that basically they reveal that the Strangers are the aliens who have kidnapped various humans, taken them to a space station that they can somehow create to kind of resemble Earth, and they've basically implanted each of these humans with memories in an attempt to kind of work out how they behave based on these memories.
Pretty much like a giant thought experiment, but made real because they can.
And the reason why the entire story happens is because Murdoch was the only one who managed to resist these memory implants, which is why he has no memory at the start. And also because he ends up being the one who has similar abilities to the Strangers, who has the similar psychic abilities. The abilities that he has is basically, it's kind of like telekinesis, being able to do psychic waves.
It can be used offensively, and it doesn't read minds or anything, but he can just move objects and do things, which is interesting, quite uncanny, which again fits noir and sci-fi genre really.
It did manage to expertly blend kind of old-fashioned filmmaking styles with more, I guess, 90s-esque style, because it's got the visual look of a much older film, but it's got the kind of pacing, even to some extent the story of a more 90s action blockbuster. Even the musical score heavily felt like a 90s blockbuster.
Yeah, I would say it was an old-feeling 90s film rather than a 90s-feeling old film. I quite enjoyed kind of the look. I mean, the alien spaceship was pretty cool. I liked the turning thing. It's like a big circular thing, almost like a big...
Yeah, that one. The one that he's attached to at the end.
Yeah, it's the machine. I quite like the look of that machine. That was quite interesting. It felt otherworldly. I like the way they shot it as well, because it's one of those shots where it's such a low angle that the scale of whatever you're in is really, really impressive. And I'm pretty sure that they also shoot that on a really wide lens just to blow it out. And I always like it when they do that, because it just does give that sense of scale. I like the fact that it feels like an old noir with the way that the city is, and it's perpetually at night. There's no light at all, because a lot of neo noir has sunlight and things like that, or at least daytime, but only at night time. Everything is old. All the cars are old. Murdoch does find that a bit odd, which is interesting.
And that is interesting how they kind of use that intentionally to show that the Strangers, they're just creating one particular environment. It never rains. The weather never actually changes. It never becomes daylight until the end. All the time, it's just the same. It's almost kind of a bit metaphorical, you could argue, about filmmaking as well, because that is kind of what filmmaking can be. It can just put you in the same environment for the entire period of time that you're watching it.
Yeah.
And this film kind of takes that idea and does it intentionally as part of its like narrative.
I think the reveal when they break through Shell Beach and then you just see space and you realise this is like a construction. In a way, it feels quite metatextual because you're like, wow, we're literally watching a constructed stage within a constructed stage, which is hilarious. But I think also what that does is it reinforces the story. It's just you can never be sure of what quite is true, what isn't. Then removes all possibility of getting context as well, which I love. There's a lot of what noir is yes, it's about the past affecting you, and it's about how your memories make you are, and how you can't ever escape them. But it's also about not being able to close the loop ever, and not being able to get back what you were, even though you might want to. And that is, for a big part of it, is how the story works. He kind of gets Shell Beach at the end. All it is a recreation of it. It's not the real Shell Beach.
The real Shell Beach probably never existed as well.
It's an often where they are able to re-engage with their fantasy, but their fantasy is also the very thing that kept them trapped there in the first place, which was just interesting.
And that overall, I think, adds to, like, I think probably the strongest aspect of the film, which to me was the story. It actually is very, very unpredictable. I didn't really know where it was going. And some of that is absolutely dependent on what cut of the film you see. Because, so me and Jack both watched the director's cut, and that is probably the preferred version of the film. If by any chance you happen to come across the theatrical cut of it, for the love of God, mute and fast forward up until you get to the title screen and keep watching. Opening basically just, it states almost everything that in the director's cut is a reveal. It was like a studio enforced like note because of like test screenings, I think. So thankfully, because the director's cut doesn't have that, in the film, you're able to basically just be in the shoes of the main character because he doesn't know what's going on, and neither do we. And then we figure out things as the movie goes on. Like, we figure out, like, it is just constructed, and we also figure out that the strangers have the ability to just stop time. Like, they have the ability to just stop everyone and everything, and then to, like, switch around their memories, you know, to change them from one set of life experiences to another set of life experiences. And that, as it goes on, is it just reveals the layers and layers, to me made the story engaging. And it also was a film that just, it never pulled out a twist that I found to be totally predictable.
No, like the film felt unexpected. Like suddenly it was like, oh yeah, the strangers are just kind of aliens. You're like, oh, okay, yeah, that works. And then you realise Shell Beach doesn't exist, and you're like, oh, that's bad. And you know, you weren't expecting that at all, because it does get built up of a let's go find it. Like even Schreiber didn't seem to know.
And even other things as well. Like, I didn't think it was going to turn out to have just been on a space station.
You could tell someone was messing with the environment. You kind of expected it was like some government kind of thing or whatever. Right, like right at the start is what it felt like. You're like, oh, you're like, okay, that makes sense. And then it ends up being aliens. You're like, okay, cool. So aliens have infiltrated Earth. That's what's going on. And then oh, they've taken them up on a space. Oh, okay. I'd always call it like a religious sort of thing. Like, it wasn't, because it was obviously all about scientific experimentation. But they valued Murdoch because he accidentally woke up. It's almost like they made him the messiah of their experiments, if you get what I mean.
I can see other religious connotations in the film. How basically at the end of it, he does become God.
He literally recreates, the Shell Beach. That's completely down to him. Turns the Earth towards the sun.
And also what he does is that he starts like a new era as well.
Yeah.
Like he finally starts an era where human beings can actually live, and that they're not just at the mercy of these like aliens.
Yeah, exactly. They're not experiments by the end. They are free-willed people.
Yeah, and that opens up all kinds of like, you know, like interesting, you know, like moral questions and other questions as well. The film kind of ends after that, so in some ways it's kind of left more up to your own interpretation how it's going to continue. It's interesting, like, comparing this to like The Matrix as well, because both of these movies are kind of similar, but compared to The Matrix, obviously this movie didn't get any sequels, so that kind of leaves it on a more interesting open-ended note, I feel.
Well, this film, I don't feel like this film, I don't think either of them really needed a sequel, but I feel like this one wouldn't benefit as much from a sequel, because the whole pleasure I had watching this film was watching the mystery come down as we realised, oh, he's not a murderer. Oh, this is an alien film. Okay, cool. And then as the film revealed itself, and going into a sequel, what could you do? They've beaten the strangers. They're gone. He's recreated the Earth of the Shell Beach. The only thing you could really explore is his relationship with now Anna. It was Emma, but now it's Anna. But I mean, what would that benefit? I mean, him restarting the relationship just felt like closure.
All I was just thinking is like, it'd be interesting to see like how humanity like reacted to it, how humanity would react, and whether or not people would like figure out what was going on, and whether or not they want to like go back home and stuff. But I feel like just kind of leaving it open ended means that you can come up with the most interesting and satisfying answer that you want to.
How many of them even knew?
And only he and Schreiber knew.
Well, exactly. So then they wouldn't be able to want to go back, would they? Because they don't know.
I mean, all they know is that they came from Earth, because they also have their memories wiped, so they don't know who they initially were either. And that's kind of an interesting like theme of the film as well. What the strangers are trying to work out is like, how do human beings act and how do they behave? And they feel their kind of whole thesis is because the strangers are trying to like restart their own dying race, and they want to figure out how to be human. And they're trying to figure it out using this sort of like memory thing by being like, okay, well, if we create these memories, does that then mean that we can work out how humans behave? But the entire film is basically just saying that it's kind of basically saying that memory isn't that important, or memory isn't more important than the ability to have free will and to make choices, or to create your own memories. And that's especially laid out in the final exchange between Murdoch and Mr. Hand, one of the strangers, where he basically just kind of says, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but he basically says, like, the key isn't in here, like pointing to his head. It's kind of basically saying that the strangers, their mission was kind of futile from the beginning.
Kind of saying you can't understand what it means to be human just by examining the mind. It's not in there.
Yeah, or even like, by like trying to brainwash the mind or will the mind to do something, or trying to like lie to the person to say that this is how your life has been,
Which, to be fair, is a pretty stupid conclusion given they could completely redesign everybody else's life. Just thinking about it, they were completely able to change people as individuals by getting rid of their memories. They really had discovered what it meant to be human in the mind. I don't like it. It made for a good scene. But they didn't prove themselves wrong as much as they just didn't find the answer to how to make yourself human.
Well, kind of right in that they weren't like necessarily proven wrong, but I think that they were proven wrong in thinking that that was the key to making you human, because what defines a human being, there's no objective answer to like what makes somebody human. But I think that what the film is basically saying is that what makes somebody human is their actions, not their past. That's kind of what was being proven. I can understand what you mean, but I think that that's more the point that was being proven.
Yeah, it's just silly to say that it isn't found in the mind, because it absolutely is, because the mind dictates action, and therefore, if action is the sum of all humans, it's how the mind and the body process together. So saying it's not purely in the mind does make sense-ish, but at the same time, to say that they were looking in the wrong place entirely is wrong.
So it's like you wanted to know what it was that makes us human. Well, you're not going to find it in here. You went looking in the wrong place. So yeah, you're right, I think.
I mean, it's a good line. It's a good line.
To kind of go back to the direction as well, I think like what really stood out to me in this movie was the editing. It's a very, very quickly cut film. It kind of puts you, especially at the beginning, it makes you feel was like kind of disoriented as the main character does, because he has no clue what's going on, and all of a sudden he's in this situation where he has to like run away from the police and evade these things and go to these different places and to like find out what's going on. And I think that the editing complements that very, very well.
It just feels so frenetic, and it's almost like images without context. I mean, they do obviously have the context, but there's at times where it feels just like you can never get your grip on what's going on. You can never get your bearings. So much happening at once. There's so much that's just got to be processed. It really does help you identify with the main character in the way that he's both got to immediately react to everything that's happening at once.
It does add to the like story, because like when I was watching, I was thinking like, wow, there's a lot going on. I need to like keep track of this. But it's definitely a film that kind of asks you to kind of keep track of it. It unravels this like mystery. It does that while still being very entertaining and exciting. It's definitely got a lot of very good action in it. But I think as the film goes on, it does slow down a little bit. Like particularly, I think in the second hour is where, for the most part, there's a lot less of that and a lot more of just conversations and, again, unraveling. I like the bits where they dial back on that cutting and they just allow it to be more of a character scene. Like particularly that scene between John and Emma when he's behind the glass and they're like speaking to each other. It's quite a romantic moment, and
yeah, it could give you a real feel of their relationship and that there is an attraction there. It helps you buy it, and then Obviously, it makes it more devastating later when Emma's completely done. And I think it depends on the moment because obviously for the scene where they all fall asleep, it starts off with quick cuts, it's really nice, and then when you see the contrast of just everyone that we've just seen quick cut just dropping, and it lingers a bit, you get such an impact from it.
It's quite an eerie scene as well, especially when you see it for the first time. It just looks so strange, just to see everybody switched off. And then when you kind of realize what's going on, you kind of think to yourself, like, wow. And the strangers do this every single hour as well, or at least it felt like they were they doing it every single hour?
Well, yeah, it was pretty much every night. They just well, it's always night, but they do it like within regular intervals. They just knock people out and then re-implant memories into their head. Like different ones. They're constantly changing who people are all the time.
It gives you that sense of like paranoia, and it gives you that sense of being on the run, not really knowing what's going on, trying to figure out what's going on. The night setting is one also that your eyes kind of get used to as well.
Especially because they bathe it in this, what it is, but there's something about the electrical yellow lighting that I love. And the way that it just keeps things not really nice and dark and just really gets like around John, and it frames him just like, it's almost like this underlight, makes him look less in control than he should be and a bit grimy, and it makes things look seedy and just it all feels off.
It makes the ending a lot more satisfying and also like very notable as well, because your eyes get used to the dark, and then all of a sudden when they show the light, it almost seems like too bright to be true. It almost like hurts your eyes. But when they show the light at the end, it's blinding just as much as it probably would have been to the main character when he creates it, and that's like a quality that I kind of picked up on. And again, it is almost subliminal because it does just rely on how your vision kind of settles into the kind of the lighting, basically.
You've got to be able to settle into it for it to work. It does recreate the noir feel while giving a tinge of, it does have a tinge of implication for like a sci-fi-ish look, to be honest. Also, just get the sense that everything is off before you see any of the weird stuff as well, like the rooms that redesign themselves and things.
Effects for the buildings that were like constantly sprouting up were also very, very impressive too. I didn't really notice any like major obvious CGI in those bits or anything. Those bits were really good. If I did have a bit of a flaw with this film, I do think that it takes itself a bit too seriously.
On the one hand, you kind of want a noir to take itself seriously, but on the other hand, it doesn't quite have there's something about an old noir that the characters are kind of laced with double-edged humour.
Mm-hmm.
It's bitter and it's cynical, but it's there. This film doesn't have that as such.
It doesn't really have that, but it doesn't necessarily have charismatic characters as well. Because noir films can have like characters that have a sort of a dry wit about themselves or other people, or even like sci-fi action films. Sometimes the hero will be kind of a jokester, or maybe you'll have another character that will provide a bit of like comic relief. But the film is largely devoid of humor. It's not that there's no humorous moments in it. It's devoid enough of humor to where there are some like silly moments. You slightly have to get used to how the strangers look, because they do all look so, I wouldn't say that they look silly, but they don't look particularly intimidating. They all don't have hair. They're all painted in white, particularly in those bits where they're in like their own lair. It is a bit like outlandish, and I think that maybe a bit more humor would have helped out to like kind of get used to them and get used to other things as well. It's because there's not a lot of humor to counterbalance it. Like I can think of two bits in particular. So like whenever the strangers were flying, I actually found that to be kind of a bit of a silly image, I have to admit.
Yeah, it just felt a bit odd.
They don't show it very often, but whenever they did show it, I was almost like, oh my god, it's like they're like Mary Poppins or something without the umbrella. It's like it did look a little bit Mary Poppins-esque with them just like floating in the air.
I also found the aliens, the costume design and things for the aliens a bit completely leather steampunky, and the costumes looked a bit silly.
I didn't have a problem with the costumes. I thought the costumes looked good. I can understand what you mean, because that kind of style has been parodied, and it is very, very 90s-ish to have everybody just in identical black clothing.
Like, it doesn't take me out of the film, but like, I remember thinking, that looks kind of restrictive and dumb.
For the most part, you can take it seriously. So I would say maybe the only bit where the film does kind of fall apart in terms of tone is the ending. Not the actual ending, but the climax. Because the climax goes full-on big, outlandish action, where it turns into like a kind of psychic big battle between Murdoch and the head member of the Strangers. Both of them basically exchanging energy blows and like floating up in the air and like having the entire bit get destroyed. That bit, I think the direction went a bit too crazy in that scene as well. It was very...
Yeah, I mean, it just felt a bit odd because you got all these flashes of the memories that are kind of in his head and all his childhood and that, and they're like, oh look, he's downloaded the super skills that he needs. But then you start getting a spinning camera, and then you get all the shaky. You get a little bit of shaky cam coming in as well at points, and then
it got kind of stroby.
It almost reminded me of the ending, kind of an underdog for most of the film. And he kind of steps up and he's got the power, and it's fair enough. Okay, fine. But I think the part that was really weird to me was that it almost felt like the ending of something like a Blade, like the end of Blade, where it was like, yes, it's going to be the big badass action thing, but that's not who Murdoch has been throughout the film.
It was more just him embracing his power and using it to like fight back against the strangers. I thought that made sense. It's just that
him fighting back against the head stranger makes sense. It's just like I didn't buy him just like straight up taking on an army and being like, yeah, let's go.
I think he was just doing what he had to do in the moment.
I think it worked as a climax. I just think it was, I don't know, it felt a bit easy to me, which is my problem with big bombastic action in the first place. It always just feels a bit easy. Like it's like, oh, the underdog hero now has learned the skills and everyone becomes cannon fodder to him, when that's not how violence works. But sure. And then I think the final fight is also where the effects didn't always hold up for me. That said, it felt tense. There was a sense of danger in the fight with Mr. Hand. The bit of like lightning in the middle of their psychic powers just looked so fake.
I watched that scene a couple of times. I didn't necessarily think that the effects were that bad. The only time I felt that the effects faltered was ironically in the most surprising reveal in the film, the bit where it's showing that they were in space. Or that the green screen there wasn't particularly good. But the effects in that final fight, I didn't think were that bad.
I feel like there's almost like the showstopper effect didn't work for me. I think one good thing about the script is like the twist that the Dr. Schreiber was not Murdoch's friend was not entirely unexpected, but it was interesting and it works. And then the verse came where Schreiber then betrayed the strangers. That also made sense.
Well, I thought that was kind of clear from the beginning. One like this big positive to the film is the Schreiber character. He has the most personality. He's probably the most well defined. He has a bit of an arc. It's not necessarily like a full change, because in some ways he was doing this all from the beginning. Like from the beginning, you kind of get the sense that he's a double agent, but it's not really clear until later on in the film that he really is. But it's also not clear from the beginning how he's assisting the strangers as well. So it's kind of almost like a kind of double reveal, like a reveal that he's the mole, but also a reveal that he's kind of a double agent.
It does play with that kind of idea that you can never know the loyalty of a wild thing to do.
And it's interesting as well, because like he's typically the kind of character that would either be the traitor or the weasel, but he's kind of a good version of both of them.
Yeah, because like in a way he is a bit of a traitor to the humans and the strangers alike, and he is a bit Weasley in the way that he kind of just worms his way into a situation. At the same time, he gets to be kind of heroic at the end.
He absolutely does.
And he also seems like fairly reasonable. Like he's quite willing to go with the Inspector and Murdoch and just try and find Shell Beach.
He's willing to like explain everything to Murdoch as well. He's kind of willing to explain the entire situation. And again, he's also willing to like assist Murdoch, particularly at the end when he like injects those like altered memories into Murdoch that kind of then like prepares him for the final battle. I ended up like really liking that character, and how I liked how it was almost kind of playing on like, again, like also old tropes of like the mad scientist as well. Yeah. It's almost like the perfect reversal of that, where he's not the main villain. He's kind of on a good guy. Or what I'd say is that he's kind of a take on both the mad scientist, but also on like Igor, because he felt a bit Igorish, the way he was always limping. He's like kind of slightly messed up
face. The look and the hair that wasn't quite right.
What else? And the fact that like he spends most of the film just like getting totally humiliated as well, which was something that was like that I quite liked, because he just spent he constantly got like beaten up, disrespected. He's always getting abused, but that just made the moments where he like helped John and did other things and did other like heroic things that much more satisfying.
It felt like he'd gone significant change as well, which was good, because I mean Murdoch obviously has quite a lot of change, and obviously Inspector Bernstead kind of comes around and goes, "Oh, I don't think you're actually the killer," but then those three are the ones that kind of get development. The villains don't change really at all.
No.
Which kind of works for the kind of story they're trying to tell.
Like, obviously, we find out stuff about, like, the strangers, but yeah, they don't learn the error of their ways or anything. Like, I will admit that in terms of like, characterization, I didn't think that the strangers were that complex as villains.
They weren't.
I can also kind of understand that that's partially the point.
I would also argue that Murdoch's not particularly complex.
No, I wouldn't say that either. But and for in both instances, I think that's a bit justified. Like with the strangers, but like first of all, it's because they aren't human and their knowledge on humanity is so limited, and like the only thing that really distinguishes them is their names. Some of them are visibly older than others, and some of them act slightly differently to the others, but largely they are almost all kind of interchangeable.
Well, I mean, I suppose they are a hive mind.
So I think in that sense, them not being that like complex
I
is
think they're
part of
not
that.
having arcs and not being too complex makes sense because
Mhm.
I mean, if they kind of had arcs, then it would be really weird because
Yeah.
like it would mean they already had the individuality that they were trying to find. But
hmm
then I would argue giving them names is a bit stupid if you're trying
Okay,
to
they're
argue.
giving them names like Mr. Hand or Mr. Yeah, like is I
Yeah,
think they're all kind of like given Mr. Book, Mr. Hand,
yeah,
Mr.
it's all
Speak,
Mister
Mr.
something.
Wall.
But I feel like that's kind of odd.
I think it works because it's just like they're
Like
all
it gives
named
the
after
audience
like
something.
generic human words, basically.
I mean, it gives the audience something to latch onto, don't get me wrong. It's just, but it
Mhm.
doesn't so much make sense for them to actually refer to themselves like that because film makes clear that they're not particularly individuals, so why should they? Like, that's part of the problem of trying to write a hive mind in the first place
hmm
because a hive mind, by rights, cannot be individual. It can
hmm
have an individual at the top dealing with it, like a queen bee, for example, but the
hmm
individual worker bees aren't exactly individuals.
I mean, some of them do stand out by appearance. I mean, the one that stands out the most is that creepy little kid who kept on turning up. He was and
Oh, yeah, Jesus.
yeah, but that's partially just because he was the only kid that we saw that was a member of the aliens, and like an alien creepy kid is just kind of will always kind of stand out naturally. I think that the actors do very well in the
They
film.
do.
Rufus Sewell, I haven't really seen him in that many movies, but I know of him. But I haven't seen him in that many things. But I think getting a lesser known actor for the Murdoch role kind of helped because then I didn't go into it with any kind of preconceived like expectations on how this guy should be acting in his role or anything. He was able to just kind of be a bit of a blank slate,
Yeah,
but
which is good because the film needed a blank slate.
I thought he did well. He was very likable. He was definitely a guy that you could feel sorry for, and at the end of it, when he turned into a god, I could believe it. He just played it very well, and has really like piercing eyes as well. And I
He
think that
does.
that helps with both the killer persona that he's been given, and also the kind of innocent position that he's in for a lot of the film. Because he does have sad looking eyes, and I think that is the kind of thing that like immediately create sympathy for
Yeah, you kind of
somebody.
connect with the situation immediately because his eyes just because they're so piercing, you can see the pain behind them. You can also see that the environment he's in doesn't make sense, and you can see his suspicion of everything around himself.
I think the standout performance is definitely Keith Sutherland as Schreiber. I really liked the voice that he put on. I will admit that it doesn't sound, if he was trying to do a German accent, it doesn't sound very German.
It doesn't sound particularly German, but the voice is uncanny enough that it works.
And I quite like the sort of, it's not a lisp, but like he always speaks like he's out of breath.
Yeah,
And I
it's like
actually
this
felt
little.
that added a lot of urgency to him because he does have a lot of exposition in the film, but he manages to make it feel like
It
natural.
made him feel like quite an overworked character, which was really, really useful. Made you realise that he might not be the most willing participant as well for the strangers.
You feel kind of bad for him as well. And again, it added emotion and urgency. And I loved how when we were being shown the memories, his voice then just changed to how Kiefer Sutherland just sounds normally. I wonder if that was like an intentional thing that Schreiber did where he switched up his voice to make it just sound as clear as possible. And I think also as motivating as possible as well. Yeah, so overall, Dark City is really, really good.
Yeah,
It's very much it's not like the best of its kind, but it is definitely a very like solid, interesting like sci-fi movie that has a very like unpredictable story, takes you on a bit of a journey. For as much action as there is, it does it does talk about deeper themes of like memory and identity. I think that stuff will probably stay with you and also give you stuff to think about as well during the film.
Well, yeah,
Um,
I think this film really does make you think about, what defines your identity. You get a sense of the importance of individuality and the importance of memory as well, which is really, really nice.
the director of this movie, Alex Proyas, he went on to do iRobot, which had the same like cool visuals and action, but didn't have that much substance underneath. And it was unfortunate because this one showed that he would like when working with like a good script, you could genuinely get out some interesting philosophical thematic ideas, and connect that even to like his main characters as well. Yeah, I would definitely recommend it.
Same here.
And it would work as like a good double feature with like stuff like The Matrix or The Truman Show, or as you mentioned, Total Recall. Weirdly enough, it also kind of reminded me of a bit of a kind of reversal of a Universal Monsters film as well.
Yeah,
They were sort of going for some like expressionism tones with like the extremely dark, moody cinematography. But I think that it almost felt like certain characters are the kinds of characters that you would see in like an old horror film, but they kind of reversed them to like make them the heroes instead, particularly with like Murdoch and Schreiber. Like Schreiber would typically be like the Dr. Frankenstein or the Igor, and Murdoch would typically be like the Wolfman or the Invisible Man or something like that.
yeah, agreed.
Did you see any of those parallels?
Well, I could see the Igor Doctor kind of idea, and it's got the kind of scientific experimentation angle. I'll tell you what it reminds me of. It almost felt like a cross between a Universal horror film and Doctor Mabuse.
Dr. Mabuse. Okay.
Yeah,
Let me just type that in.
he was a master of disguise and took, like telepathic hypnosis, and he was like a German master criminal. But the thing about it that kind of got me was the way that he was able to bring reality into kind of what he kind
Oh,
of
I
had.
got it. Okay. I found the character that you're talking about. Yeah, I think I've heard of him. A very old character, but yeah, okay. On the next episode, we're going to be discussing the film. It's going to be another kind of double episode, but we'll be discussing on the next two episodes. We'll be discussing both Enter the Dragon and The Crow, also directed by Alex Proyas, and both of these two films one starring Bruce Lee, the other one starring Brandon Lee. All right, see ya.